Well, hi YouTube. How are you guys doing today? Something has been on my mind of late. This mostly concerns our name, our first names. Mostly as Africans, we really like to use foreign names. For example, I would say my name is Dennis Akibas or Joseph Kimathi or someone. I've just been wondering why we still call ourselves Western names, for example, or English names, the examples of which I have just stated. Personally, I think a name is a brand that states where you are. By mere mention of the name Akibas, of course, you know he's from Africa, or he's from such and such a country in Africa, or Praveen, or he's Indian, or even Keith, maybe he's Caucasian. So as Africans, I caught myself wondering, why do we like using Western names? Mostly this is common, for example, if you go to the western part of Africa, which has been colonized by the French, for example. You find people calling themselves Francois, using all these, Western names. And if you go to East Africa, you find Moses, Joseph, mostly these biblical names. But other people, though, they do not incorporate African names into their own. Let's take an example of a Chinese, for example. Mostly a Chinese would have, the first name would be Chinese and the last name would be Chinese. And the same thing applies to an Indian. The first name would be Indian, the last name would be Indian. I believe a name, being as a brand, should be as pure as possible. For example, we have seen some of the biggest brands, Kellogg's, Nike, Kodak, or iPhone even, for example. These brands are developed over time and are fiercely protected. They do not want to minimize the use of such a thing. I think we should approach, as Africans, we should approach our naming ceremony the same way. We should be really proud of the fact that we are Africans, and so our names, first and last names, should be all African, for example. I've already seen this practice in certain parts of Africa where the first name is a given name, which is an African name, and the last name is a family name. So in the end, you're all called the African, you all have the African name as an identity in the end. Perhaps you have seen on LinkedIn several people hide their last names. They would use the first letter of it, for example, in fear that the hiring manager would probably not select them if they have an ethnic name, for example. I think these concerns are warranted, of course, given work that is out there that states that people with more ethnic names are discriminated against when it comes to the hiring process, for example. But I think we should not give up. We should be very proud of where we come from. We're proud of our names, for example, as Africans. And quite frankly, I think we should do away with the Western name. Africa, of course, as a brand, has been tainted in a negative light. It's associated with distress, hunger, poverty. Some of which is true, but the majority of it is not true. Africa, of course, is much more than these negative things that I mentioned. We do not see big brands minimizing the use of their names, for example, their brand names. They do not use the first letter of Nike, because then it dilutes its identity. And so in the same light, we should fight really, really hard to reclaim back our identity, to have all our names as African, to rename our streets like Victoria, to name it an African name, major towns and libraries, and roads, remove the Western names. For in the end, we will all still be identified as African, no matter who you call it, or what you call yourself, or where you find yourself. And we should be proud of this. So, those are just some 2 cents I had this evening about what's in a name. That is what I think about the naming incidents in Africa. Well, what do you think about it? Keep it down in the comment. Thank you.